I'm dumbfounded in the lack of analysis or discourse on the issue of the counterintelligence program and the damage that it has done, not just to Black communities, but especially to Black communities historically in the United States. But what made me think about and decide to do an episode on the Counterintelligence Program, or COINTELPRO, was because of all of the hoopla lately about the Jeffrey Epstein files. So the emails that have been dumped and all of the damning evidence from credible email sources indicating exactly a lot of things that should lead to an investigation. What many of us might not necessarily be familiar with is how that process, or how these processes relate to the COINTEL program and the release or the declassification of the COINTEL program. It was really as big as what we're seeing now, in many respects even bigger. The stakes were just as high in the sense that, it implicated very powerful men doing some terrible things. So now that I've established the relationship between the Epstein files and the Counterintelligence Program, some of you might be asking, well, what the hell is the Counterintelligence Program? Well, shit, I'm glad you asked. All right, the Counterintelligence Program allegedly ended in 1971. It was kick-started in 1956 under the leadership of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. And it was basically designed to identify groups and individuals in the US that the US had deemed an enemy to the status quo.
But COINTELPRO took these efforts to a whole new level. They used psychological warfare to sow distrust and paranoia among members, spread false information to discredit leaders, and even incited violence to create chaos and justify arrests.
I know what they're going to say, not guilty, because no one saw them pull the trigger. I'm tired of that.
They had a number of goals, right? Let's just say from 5 to 1, because I really want to focus on one. Prevent the growth and unity of movements. Prevent solidarity amongst oppressed people, Black and brown people, right? To create division amongst Black and brown people. So that's 5. 4 is to undermine the public credibility of groups and organizations. So they planted false stories in the media, they leaked information, they harassed activists, they did all of these kinds of things. Number 3, create internal conflict and division. They spread like false rumors, forged letters, misinformation campaigns about activists and organizations, etc. Number 2, disrupt and discredit organizations, especially those promoting civil rights, human rights, Black power, anti-war, socialist, Black liberation, such as the Black Panther Party, SCLC, SNCC, the Nation of Islam, and others. The first goal, the most important one to me at least, as it relates to this conversation, is to prevent, this is the wording, this is the verbiage, to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. Emphasis on Black Messiah. You could have chose any group of words to describe, but they chose a Black Messiah, not to help him or help her or help them to, bring about the changes necessary for their communities, but to prevent. All right. Now, what did that mean? So the FBI is saying it sought to stop the emergence of a charismatic Black leader who could unify and electrify the movement, explicitly naming people like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, and Fred Hampton. The question that drives me as a researcher more than any other one question is simply, how do you prevent a Black Messiah from emerging? How can you even identify the potential, the possibility, because you're talking about preventing. So to prevent means you have to, at an early stage, identify someone who has traits and qualities of being a Black Messiah who could electrify and unify. How do you do that? Where do you start? How about schools? How about public schools? I mean, we all know what the school to prison pipeline, we all heard about that. I don't think we really understand it, but we hear about it. We all see the suspension and expulsion rates of Black boys, which is through the roof, the highest in the country. So when they make a mistake, you drop the hammer on them. We all saw the movie, the Ryan Coogler movie. It's funny, I made a Ryan Coogler reference to Sinners in another podcast. This is not intentional. Anyway, so his movie, Judas and the Black Messiah. Now it's the Fred Hampton story. Now who was Fred Hampton? Fred Hampton was a 21-year-old Black Panther Party leader out of Chicago. Fred Hampton was under surveillance since the time he was 14 years old. Targeted for assassination and under surveillance because of his political activism in school with I believe it was the NAACP. As a kid, he was a kid when he died, but as a teenager, he was under surveillance, under the close watch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, considered a threat. But he was killed, he was assassinated in 1969. The man did more in his 21 years of life than almost anyone I can think of.
Because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution.
So if we look at some of the tactics that the COINTELPRO used, right, it included infiltration of organizations, right, and basically putting spies in, right, and they would do this a number of different ways. They would take a petty criminal off the street and they would tell them, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we're gonna throw you in jail, or you can go home. And by going home means that you're gonna have to join this organization, get next to these individuals and tell us what they're doing. You know, like for example, you know, the Black Panther Party would walk around armed, but they never initiated, you know, shootouts with police. That wasn't what their goal was.
Newton had studied law and knew it was legal to carry arms in California as long as they were not concealed. The Panthers began to patrol their communities. As the movement grew, media coverage depicted party members as a caricature of Black militancy.
And so what would happen is when one of the infiltrators would infiltrate the group, you know, armed as well, and when police show up, the infiltrator would start shooting at the police. And the Panthers are like, wait, what are you doing? So now police start shooting back. So now they got to return fire. And now you got a full-fledged shootout.
Everyone was ordered out of the area, and the battle went on sporadically for 5 hours.
The reason why we know about and was able to uncover the reality of the Counterintelligence Program was because anti-war movement groups in the 1960s, early 1970s, protesting the Vietnam War, were very active in the US. And they were very aggressive.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest. For the most part orderly, minor scuffles did occur between the demonstrators and hecklers.
And so these anti-war movement groups were protesting the drafting of many of their brothers, their uncles, their sons being drafted and sent off to Vietnam and coming home in a box, basically, because these white boys were going overseas to Vietnam and getting their heads knocked off. And they were tired of losing, you know, family members to this war that was very, very unpopular. and the draft that was basically just cherry picking white men and white boys out of their communities, out of these affluent white communities. And so the anti-war movement and the groups and the activists were very active in this time. And one of the things that they did as it relates to this conversation specifically was one particular group based out of a Philadelphia suburb. They cased out this particular FBI building location in Media, Pennsylvania. They broke in, but they scoped it out. They planned it out over a significant amount of time, right? And then they waited for the right day to break into the FBI. And the day that they chose was the day of the Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier fight in New York City at Madison Square Garden. They chose that day because that date was described as the fight of the century, right? 15 rounds. So what they were initially breaking into the FBI for was to steal the draft records and to prevent, more white men from being drafted and white boys from being drafted into the Vietnam War. So they were able to pull it off, after a long period of time of planning, they were able to pull it off, and they pull out these files, because you gotta remember, this is 1971, so everything's digital now. But back then, you had file cabinets and everything was on paper. You had like loads of paper and file cabinets and all this kind of stuff. So they took everything out of the files, right? And they took all of these files, and then they just left with the file, not really knowing what they had. They got everything, basically, and they left. Now, when they get back to where they're, wherever they're going, right? They begin to sort through the files that they had stolen or that they had took. And what they found was, not only did they find the draft records, but more importantly, as it relates to this conversation, they found out about the Counterintelligence Program, which again, no one knew about. Now, Black activists and Black civil rights and human rights and Black power leaders have been saying for decades that the police were watching them, were working against them, were surveilling them, were infiltrating their institutions, and they were under this suspicion for the longest time, but they never had any evidence. So now the anti-war movement protesters, they have this evidence for the first time.
After several long nights digging for documents that looked the most revealing, the burglars sent copies to journalists, including Washington Post reporter Betty Medsger.
She said that one of the things that struck them more than anything else, she said, was the level of infiltration and the level of surveillance happening in Black communities.
But also in that first set were descriptions of the nature of the surveillance taking place in Black communities, which was that, for instance, throughout the country, every FBI agent was supposed to hire at least one informer who would report to him on a regular basis about the activities of Black people.
We all understood that the Black leaders were being surveilled and harassed and infiltrated and et cetera. We understood that. She said, but we couldn't understand how the common, everyday Black folks were being surveilled. She said they had surveillance in the barbershops, in the local churches, in the schools. They were in everyday communities, Black communities, trying to understand and disrupt whatever Black people were doing. Everything that Black people were doing. These are her words. This is what she said based on her reading of what was found in the Counterintelligence Program papers, which are declassified FBI memos. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy, period. It was political suicide to publish this story. But one publication decided to publish the story. Anyone know which one it was? I'll tell you. I'll give you a hint. It was the Washington Post. And they published the story and it created a firestorm.
Secret FBI memos made public today show that the late J. Edgar Hoover ordered a nationwide campaign to disrupt the activities of the New Left without telling any of his superiors about it.
Many of the techniques were clearly illegal. Burglaries, forged blackmail letters, and threats of violence were used.
Civil rights lawyers from all over the country started filing FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act requests, to petition the government to declassify the COINTELPRO. So there was a long fight that ensued. The government fought like hell. They spent millions of dollars fighting to not release the COINTELPRO documents. They fought like a mug.
The government would have been derelict in its duty had it not taken measures to protect the fabric of our society.
Marriages were destroyed, violence was encouraged, many Americans were tapped and bugged, had their mail opened by the CIA and the FBI, and their tax returns used illegally.
But eventually, after about a decade or so, the Freedom of Information requests were granted. And what happened was the release of COINTELPRO documents. Here's a book, right, that has photocopies of those original documents, right? Photocopies of the original transcripts and documents of the COINTELPRO. This book is called Documents from the FBI's Secret Wars Against Dissent in the United States. The COINTELPRO papers is by authors Ward Churchill and Jim Vanderwall. But there are other books on this topic. I have some more behind me somewhere. But this book is like almost like this is just straight up and down, it's just the raw text from the Counterintelligence Program. So how does all this tie together? Shit, I don't know. What I know is this. I know that the folks in power trying to cover the Jeffrey Epstein files are the same ones, even if they're not the same people. Ideologically, they are the same. Their values and their beliefs are the same. Their goals are the same. They are the same ones. They fought against the declassification of COINTELPRO. They are the ones who orchestrated and gave cover to COINTELPRO. They are the ones who initiated COINTELPRO. Even though they said the COINTELPRO ended in 1971, they say that, but that's the time when, you know, they broke into the FBI and everything became public. So did they really? I don't know. They said they did, but we didn't know. We weren't supposed to know about it anyway. So they could be telling us anything. But what I do know, what we all know, is we all know that there's a vacuum in black leadership. And part of that was because black leaders, all of them came from black organizations. And all of our black organizations have been infiltrated or dismantled, broken to pieces. It's like a type of genocide happening right in front of us. And so, and we need to ask ourselves why. Because we've been a thorn in the side of the U.S. from day one. We never accepted slavery. We never accepted it. We never, in general, I mean, there are some exceptions, but in general, we never accepted enslavement. We never accepted ourselves as, second-class citizens, as less than or 3/5 human. We never accepted that. We never accepted like the idea of white supremacy, that whites are superior to us. We didn't accept that. We pushed back against that. Despite the trauma that we had inherited, we wanted to live, and that desire to live was a threat to white supremacy and this idea of freedom and democracy and the land of liberty and all of this stuff. But you got 30, 40 million descendants of slaves in your country that you won't even acknowledge. In order for us as Black people in America to do anything of substance moving forward, we have to take into account what COINTELPRO did, because history is not just a thing that's relegated to the past. History is a thing that you have to learn from in order to prevent the kinds of traps and snares that potentially lie in wait, and learn the lessons of the past as you move forward. That's the purpose of history. And for us, as Black folks, as Black Americans, we need to know our history more than ever right now. And so, that's it for now, man. Peace, y'all.
Word up, quick to set it, don't wet it. Real niggas lick shots, peace, Connecticut. Now, yo.
What up, yo? Time is running out, it's for real, though. Let's connect politics, good,